Welcome to the BBC's Global News podcast on YouTube. Hello, I'm Janat Jalil, and today we're looking at the use of cyber warfare in the US-Israeli war on Iran. I'm joined by the BBC's cyber correspondent, Joe Tidy. Hello, Joe.
Hi.
We've been hearing a lot about the massive firepower of the US and Israel, but cyber ops are playing an increasingly crucial role too, aren't they?
Yeah, and there is that massive sort of juxtaposition between seeing and hearing so much about the power of Israeli and US Air Force. We're seeing the ships, they're posting almost every hour, pictures, videos slickly made of all the weapons and ships and planes and launchers. But we are seeing and hearing very little about cyber. But what's interesting is it's clearly playing a big role because we are hearing little hints and glimpses in the press conferences that the US are giving us. Because you hear things like this from Admiral Brad Cooper saying, "We continue with strikes into Iran from seabed to space and cyberspace." And I think what's really, really interesting for me is the earliest press conference they gave about the attacks was the one where we heard the most. So, for example, we heard that it was all part of this they call it a synchronized and layered operation. So the general said, across every domain, land, sea, air, cyber, the US Joint Force delivered synchronized and layered effects designed to disrupt, degrade, deny and destroy Iran's ability to conduct and sustain combat operations. But sadly, we're not getting much detail about what's happening there.
Well, there have been some reports, though, haven't there, about how Israel's intelligence service, Mossad, has been able to penetrate deep into Iranian society using cyber operations.
Yeah, it's really hard to get verification because, of course, not only are we talking about an adversary in Iran and a society where we don't hear much back, especially because the internet's not working there as well. They switched it off, the regime. But also there is a kind of strange, it's not just the fog of war, but there's something about cyber where we're not told. They try and keep these things very secret. But there were reports, as you say, about the Israeli cyber unit infiltrating Iran to such a degree that they were able to build up this giant mesh of security cameras, traffic cameras, CCTV cameras that they had hacked in order to carry out surveillance on people like the Ayatollah and the regime top leaders in order to work out where they are, when they are, to develop what they call patterns of life, which enabled, we think, the initial strikes. Other operations that are being talked about as well are defacements of news websites in Iran around the same time as the initial wave of bombs. And a very interesting attack that, again, unconfirmed, but it wouldn't surprise me at all, to be honest, with things we've seen in the past, that a very popular Iranian prayer timing app called Beid Shaba, which has 5 million downloads apparently, that was hacked around the same time as the initial strikes, and a push notification went out, initially saying something like "help has arrived," and then later on giving instructions and demanding that people surrender. So you've got these kind of the preparation element to cyber, which unconfirmed, but wouldn't surprise me at all, where, we hear of months and even years of work going on behind the scenes to lay the groundwork for cyber, for kinetic attacks, as they call them, so bombs and missiles, being done by cyber operatives. But then we've got this other element to it where we're seeing cyber combined with kinetic attacks at the point in which they want to start the war. So we heard in the first press conference that US Cyber Command and US Space Command were described as the first movers who layered non-kinetic effects, disrupting, degrading and blinding Iran's ability to see, communicate and respond. That's military speak, obviously, but I think we can glean from that there was some sort of activity at exactly the same point in order to make Iran unable to see what was coming.
And there's an increasingly important role for AI as well, because we've just seen this recent row between the Pentagon and the company Anthropic over using its AI model, with Anthropic saying it won't allow the Trump administration full control because it's worried about what this means for domestic surveillance, for autonomous lethal weapons being used by the US military. So quite a sort of dystopian scenario there.
It is, and the Defence Secretary or Secretary of the Department of War, as he refers to it, Pete Hegseth, he has said, he wants the military to be AI first. He wants it to be using AI first and foremost in every single element of operation. And we got a little glimpse of this when Pete Hegseth was doing one of his press conferences. So Pete Hegseth said, "I was talking to a young colonel who's iterating on how we target and how we find and fix different aspects of what the Iranians are trying to do." What I was sort of painted a picture there of him sort of by some sort of young whiz kid operative who was at a laptop or a computer, and I can just imagine that they're using AI, lots and lots of tooling that we haven't even seen yet, for example, to carry out this targeting. Because the phase we're in of the war now, it seems to be they're, as is being described, they're hunting for targets. Because they've dropped, thousands and thousands of missiles and bombs.
And they've assassinated dozens of senior figures.
Yeah, and now it's all about degrading the military as much as possible. So that kind of thing is where cyber and AI will really be playing a crucial role. That kind of getting that information in from open source, satellite imagery, security cameras, traffic cameras, whatever, espionage, and trying to work out, right, what can we attack, where is it, how can we pinpoint it in the country in order to make those strikes as devastating as possible.
And what about the internet blackout that's been imposed by the Iranian authorities? There's hardly any internet access. It's very hard to find out what's going on. It's very hard for people in Iran to get messages out. How is that affecting the cyber warfare?
Well, that's been a really interesting aspect to it, because Iran is considered to be a cyber superpower of sorts. It's not up there with the UK, or even obviously the US is way ahead of everyone else, and China, but it is a threat. And we have seen hardly any return fire in terms of cyber from Iran. And some people think that could be because Iran has effectively switched off the internet, but that hasn't affected things that much in the past that we've seen, because of course there are ways that authoritarian governments can keep themselves, their operatives, open in terms of internet connectivity, whereas the rest of the population is unable to get online. For example, North Korea, that they're very, very online as a nation, but the actual civilians and citizens aren't. So that has been a bit puzzling. There have been all sorts of warnings saying that Iran will retaliate in cyber, but it just hasn't come. One of the other theories is that, well, two really. Could it be because Iran's cyber operations have been impacted or impaired in some way? There is talk of an Israeli strike directed at that kind of facility. I would be surprised if that's the case, though, because if it would be distributed across the country and it would be about underground in bunkers, that kind of thing. So I'd be surprised if that was the answer. The other one is, have we overestimated Iran? For years now, they have got this history of pretty impactful cyber attacks, but nothing happened in June either, when the outbreak of conflict there, and nothing's happening now. So it's quite strange, but still the cybersecurity world is sort of braced for some sort of response from Iran.
What has it been able to do in the past?
Lots of big, disruptive, kind of noisy attacks. So, for example, wiper attacks. These are a bit of a speciality of Iran. That is when a cyber attacker gets into a system. And we often talk about ransomware, where a system, all the computers are kind of scrambled so the data is unusable. But with a wiper attack, you don't care about a ransom or disruption. You just want to destroy that company or that organization. So you delete everything, essentially. So we saw, for example, in 2012, Iran was accused of attacking Saudi Arabia's oil giant Aramco with a wiper attack. It destroyed 30,000 computers and plunged that company into obviously weeks and months of utter carnage and chaos. A similar thing happened to someone who spoke out in the US about Iran, and he owned some casinos, and all of those casinos were hit as well. There's also been alleged attacks against US and Israeli water treatment and petrochemical plants, which, is very serious. We're talking about potential, real damage to real people there in terms of, if you could cause some sort of a kinetic effect to cyber attacks. So there is this storied history that Iran has, and because of that reputation, they are always sort of to be feared in a sense, if you're coming from an adversarial point of view from the West. But then at the same time, you have to bear in mind that the kind of information that we get, the signals that we get, the warnings that we get, come from this giant cybersecurity industry that's Western dominated, and they of course make money from scaring us all into thinking that Iran is going to do X, Y, Z, therefore we need to buy their products to keep us safe.
What do all these operations tell us about the future of cyber warfare? How scary is it? How scared should we be?
Well, I think we have to be careful not to sort of overstate the role that cyber plays, because if the Russia-Ukraine conflict has showed us anything, it's that cyber will pale into near insignificance when it comes to missiles and drones pulverising buildings and killing people in their homes or on the battlefield. But what we are seeing is further evidence that cyber has an absolutely crucial part to play in modern conflict, because it prepares the groundwork and it degrades the abilities of an adversary. And also the sort of stage we're at now, it continues a conflict, because, of course, it's only through cyber and spacecom and that kind of capability that you're able to carry out attacks on otherwise hidden and shrouded targets.
Thanks, Joe. That was the BBC's cyber correspondent, Joe Tidy. And if you like this episode, please subscribe to us here on YouTube. If you'd like us to cover any other stories, leave a comment below. And if you want to listen to more international news, you can always download our Global News podcast.